2, 1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, the economic miracle that Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen pulled off post-pandemic with all of the global wars happening around, rampant inflation, supply chain crisis, and problems all around the world, we're cutting it too close and flying too close to the sun. We believe this is an outlier situation rather than the rule, and in many other instances, this could have turned out worse in terms of our economic situation, going to the gutter and having a hard landing as opposed to the soft landing that we had and we are thankful for in hindsight. We have been gambling at odds and chance for far too long that monetary and fiscal policy would magically align to be able to work together, but we think that this is too risky and cutting it too close. That is to say, something has to change. We are here not to gamble with the gods and play Icarus. First thing that we think this debate is about, and the first feature of our policy, is about giving central banks like the Federal Reserve in the US or the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas here in the Philippines, the Bank of England, or the Bank of Japan, to an extent, more power, authority, and influence to be able to affect the fiscal side or how we're able to spend our money and the extents of that. That is to say, the central bank monetary policy will be status quo in terms of their ability to influence things like reserve requirements, open market operations, and interest rates. But the new feature is going to be twofold, right? A, as the info slide says, the ability to quantitatively and also, I guess, qualitatively be able to influence taxation levels. Meaning, in instances of an economic crisis, having to do things like raise up particular taxes for the rich individuals like Trump and Elon, and also large multinational corporations who have enough fat to be able to take that hit. And B, being able to influence certain government budgets. That is to say, it would make sense in particular crises in the economy to be able to double down on things like social welfare to ensure that as people get laid off or as people get shocked by the economy, they can still afford things like basic necessities and they're still able to do things like be able to get access to healthcare, which we think is proximate to you regardless of who you are or where you come from. That is to say, the fiscal side will still be the one to be able to literally spend and distribute it, but the problem we have, I think, in status quo is that it's just far too slow, meaning there are so many instances where they fight and they try and debate, etc., and a lot of the things come late, and as a consequence, we're not able to make meaningful change in terms of being able to make sure that inflation doesn't get out of hand or spending gets out of hand. We think the status quo way in terms of being able to carry out fiscal policy will still be the same. You coordinate with the executive branch, with the office of the president, and you work very closely with the treasury. The way in which this will get passed in terms of the House of Representatives or Congress is going to be the same. Why exactly is status quo particularly harmful, and why is it not enough and not working? Why do we need this policy? We think, especially in economic crises, there needs to be able to make particularly fast decisions, especially at the point in which we need to be able to make sure that interest rates don't get out of hand to the point that it makes the debt burden on our obligations way too high, or this becomes way too low to the point that you have so much money in the economy that leads to rampant inflation. Status quo has largely been inflationary, and that is precisely the fault of the situation right now wherein they're two separate entities. They're both important. In fact, I'd posit they're both important sides of the coin, but there are instances that the central bank and the ones governing the monetary policy side should be the ones being able to influence it. Why is that the case? Because you might ask, Joseph, won't it make it too OP for the monetary policy side? And why can't it be the reverse? I have a very simple answer. It is because the fiscal side, who is largely correlated with the current power in government or the incumbent leaders, are quite proximate to corporations, rich elites, and people on the ground who often like spending. Think about it like drinking punch in a party. Of course, you're having fun, things are nice, you drink a lot, And then what happens is everyone gets high on the inflation, and as a consequence, oh no, when the party lights have to come on and people have to face economic sobriety, when the monetary policy comes knocking and saying, hey, we have to be able to raise our reserve requirements for commercial investment banks. Hey, we have to be able to increase our interest rates in order to be able to make sure that inflation doesn't get out of hand to the point that people can't fucking heat their homes during winter or can't afford food and have to be able to do things like shoot fentanyl up their veins in order to feel some sort of relief, is exactly the point at which the fiscal side is like, okay, we'll try to do it. But that's too slow, ladies and gentlemen. And we've seen that happen over the past few months and years as this constantly becomes trying to be able to chase after Icarus and hoping that it's going to be okay. But at some point, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to fly too close to the sun and we are going to burn. And that's exactly the point in which America or the rest of the world will go through an economic crisis that we might not be able to rebound from. Side opposition's rhetoric will go something along the lines of, hey man, status quo's fine, we're able to do it. But take a look at each crisis and how it actually takes longer for the bond market, the stock market, and the commodity market to be able to rebound. On average, it gets 10, 20, and sometimes even 30% longer after each economic crisis. That is to say, time is of the essence now to be able to make sure that these things don't get out of hand, and as a consequence, we're going to be able to do our role. What are the impacts here, right? The impact is that we're able to make more expedient and painful decisions, especially at the point in which we have to turn the party lights on and say, hey guys, please stop spending. We're going to be able to control your particular budget. But second impact, in terms of the rich corporations, politicians, and elites, we're going to be able to increase taxes where and why necessary. Especially since these people have enough savings and retained earnings in their balance sheet to be able to take the hit on their net worth, as opposed to that obligation going back to the American people when these people are caught between a rock and a hard place of high inflation, high interest rates, and these people are screwed 6 ways to Sunday. For all of these reasons, status quo can be worse. We have to change something. We have to act now. Don't fly too close to the sun. We are very proud to open this debate and stand inside proposition.